Ben Schmerler. He is DP Solutions Director of Strategic Operations, and he was recently featured on WJZ Washington Channel 7 with the Security on the Go tips. So, Ben, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thanks everybody for attending today. This is our webinar on security on the go, security strategies when traveling. It's the summer. A lot of people, and I guess even if it wasn't the summer, we are very much more of a mobile operation these days in a lot of our lives. And I think it's really important that we talk about practical considerations when we are on the road, oftentimes flying, going to other states, and have to get things done. So we thought we'd come up with some content today, talk about what we can do to best minimize our risks, and also take some questions. So I'll get into it. Come on, there we go. All right, so here's a little intro. So when it comes to technology, productivity, and security, we really have some conflicting messages. And as you can see from from the little graphic with the guy apparently hanging out on the outside of the airplane, we're all over the place. We want to have engaged people who utilize proper technology as well as a common sense to work remote, but in a reasonably safe way. So the industry really sells the convenience and mobility, the way to always communicate, always connect. It's very empowering, right? When it doesn't really matter where you are, even on the airplane, they have Wi-Fi these days. You can just pick up your phone and get crucial information right away. And that's a great thing. It's very convenient, very empowering. But the experts always tell us never, right? If any sort of thing you read about when it comes to these sorts of items is that you should never do these things. Never connect to Wi-Fi. Never use a hotel's Wi-Fi. Never do this type of business in public, etc. And I feel like what we have to do is sort of shift the discussion and say, we realize that there are some risks that occur when traveling. It doesn't mean that business stops. It doesn't mean that work stops. It means that we have to do things in a better way so as to get more effective work done while also being secure. And I think we can strike a better balance. So for our agenda today, we have a few items. The first is we want to design mobile security into our system design. So we're going to talk about things like how we actually think about these things when actually building our systems. We want to have good maintenance and support that supports this mobile work. We need to think about how we use secure channels of communication on the public internet. So all of this is happening on the big highways of the internet, on the 695 or 495 or 95 of the highway, but we have to use these things no matter where we are in a secure way. So how can we use these publicly available resources where traffic is free flowing in a way that is reasonably secure? We're going to talk about working on networks that we do not maintain. So mention the hotel, mention the Starbucks or whatever. We're going to be in environments where we may have to connect out on these networks where we really don't know what's behind them. Are there things that we can do to minimize our risks working in those environments? We're going to talk about mobile device management, which is often overlooked when it's discussed when we talk about work in the first place. So I think it's a really important topic. We're going to talk about physical device security. So, when you actually have a physical device in hand, what do you have to consider so that device is not lost or stolen? And then, of course, the implications if it is. Then we're going to get into things like creating a culture of responsible mobile work, engaged individuals who think critically about this stuff in real time. So we want people who are considering, who are doing this stuff. We want them to think in real time exactly what they're doing, so that when they are remote and they are working, that they can look out for anything suspicious and actually be responsible from a personal perspective. We're talking about monitoring and incident management. The tools we can use perhaps to, when we are working remotely, if there are things we can do to shoot down any sort of interceptions of our data, stop hacks as they're occurring if we have the resources to do so, and then of course Q&A. So initial design, if we don't have the right infrastructure in place, we can't make it reasonably secure. So everything starts with design. It always has to start with workflow analysis and design. Any good design starts with business workflow in mind, not technology necessarily. So we need to ask ourselves, for example, which systems need to be accessed outside the office and which do not. So where is our staff? Are we mostly a centralized office? Do we mostly have people who sit in the office all the time, with the exception of the guy who checks their email remotely every so often? Or do we have a series of people who fly all across the country or across the world, and they're always having requests for data either in our home office where we have servers installed, or maybe to our cloud, or some kind of combination of it, of which, you know, they're connecting to our Azure cloud or Amazon or something like that. Where do people work? How do people work? And where do they need to work? And when people are remote, what access do they really need for us to be productive? Because sometimes the proper answer is to say no. This kind of work is just so important. We're going to do it in these specific places. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Are all the devices, firewalls, and operating systems really up to date? And more importantly, are they in a supportable state? So when we're implementing stuff like this, our security is only going to be strong as the weakest link, and older items tend to be the most vulnerable. I was actually doing a vulnerability test yesterday for a client, and unsurprisingly, they had a series of servers, and the server that was running Server 2008, which hits end of life at the end of this year from Microsoft, has the most vulnerabilities. Well, this is not really a surprise. It's hard to build strong mobile design if our core systems are not up to date and in a supportable state. You know, in January, I can't make a Windows 7 PC or a Server 2008 server a secure thing to work on mobile, just because Microsoft's not supporting those environments. Those flaws will always exist. Does our technology perform sufficiently? So basically, we want to make sure that people don't work around the security we put in place. They don't work around our systems. They don't work mobily on an unsecured device or on a hotel, you know, just some lobby-based PC, and they're doing this because they don't like the way their personal computer works for them. I mean, that's a bad thing. We want to have systems that are both secure and functional. If the system isn't functional, it's hard to expect people to work in a secure fashion. That's really important. Are we using strong authentication procedures? You know, things like good password policies. And honestly, today, it's almost a universal recommendation that we're utilizing multi-factor authentication so that we can be sure that when we're accessing either a sensitive account or a remote system or a cloud environment or anything, that the people who are logging into these systems are who they say they are, because our authentication procedures, the things that verify who is actually logging in, is really up to speed and secure. If you're not really using MFA right now to connect to systems remotely that you care about, whether it's a web-based application, your Office 365 platform, maybe a CRM or an ERP solution or a database or something with financial records in it, you're really doing a disservice to your risk, because really it's only a matter of time before a password is cracked. With the rise of phishing and social engineering and the dark web, no password is truly secure forever. And while a good password policy helps mitigate those risks, you know, where you're refreshing passwords and putting in new passwords every so often with strong rules, that's all great and all, but that extra token really drops the risk dramatically and makes the password policy a little bit easier to manage. So I really stress that this is something we need to really be focusing on universally when it comes to sensitive systems, as long as we can implement it. The other side of this is support and maintenance, and this is really something that has to occur before you start traveling. You know, you can't just start working and worry about the support and maintenance later. I think people, based on all of the marketing, they hear about how things like Microsoft Windows has built-in patching and updating, and that your phone has built-in patching and updating. Your applications from your Android phone, they get patched by Google Play and stuff like that. But nothing is really set in and forget it. Automatic maintenance tools require some oversight. Getting back to my example with the vulnerability test I ran yesterday, the best patch management tools, which are important, in fact, just to pivot a little bit, patch management is essential. even the best tools that are designed to automatically do this will miss stuff. So it's important that we have a patch management solution in place where we are actively monitoring the use and procedures and process of our patching system, but also that we maybe consider doing vulnerability testing every so often to make sure that all of these maintenance approaches are effective. Obviously, and this is not news probably to anyone on the call, up-to-date antivirus and anti-malware is critical. We can't let any process interrupt that stuff. Users should know that these tools need to be allowed to run and run effectively. And if they're not run, if you don't have antivirus, anti-malware in place, the truth is that something will get exploited. So it's very critical that we have it. And I really recommend centrally managed tools that users cannot shut off on their own, that if there's a problem with it, we can see it from a centralized console. I mean, this is part of what we do here when we provide it to our managed services clients. So I think it's something really everyone should do. And then also perimeter-based security. So things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, perhaps in certain environments, anything on the perimeter of our network. So if we have a cloud host, our Office 365 platform or our Azure platform, or maybe we have a server closet in our office that we maintain servers on that people remote into, we need to make sure that those safes, if you will, those vaults, have good security on the perimeter, because the same ways that your people remote into these assets in order to work are going to be the same things that are potentially exploited if not properly secured. Just recently, I imagine a lot of people on the call have heard about the Capital One data breach. This database that they kept was in Amazon's cloud. Amazon's cloud was secure. Amazon's cloud was not compromised. What was compromised was the web application firewall on the side of Capital One, something that Capital One maintains. This exploit was taken advantage of by a person in the know who knew what this vulnerability was, and they exploited a perimeter-based flaw to get into an otherwise secure system. It didn't matter that Amazon had their act in order. The end user maintenance, the people on Capital One's end, did a poor job managing their perimeter-based security, and that's how that breach happened. Obviously, the person who did that is now arrested, and I'm sure will face some legal problems. But we don't want to get to that point. We want to make sure that our perimeters are secure in advance, so that we're not facing these kinds of issues in the future. Channels of communication and data in transit. So if we have a secure data location and a secure endpoint, then our next focus should be on the way data flows between those destinations. So think about this. We're all using the same public internet. When data leaves our office via our Comcast or Verizon router, through our firewall, etc., now it's bouncing between routers on the public internet. It's just basically following the GPS of the internet to get to its destination. So we need to make sure that while this data is in transit, while we are sending information from one point to the other and through 20 hops along the way, that nobody is able to read this and take sensitive information, perhaps someone's social security number, perhaps trade secrets, whatever it is, and can't just read this stuff and steal it and exploit it. So what can we do to mitigate this stuff? We should be using encryption in transit. So things like encrypted email solutions, secure FTP sites, secure file, just other sort of file transfer solutions, things like that, VPNs, which we'll talk about in a minute on personal VPNs. We should be, if we have data that we're concerned about someone reading on the highway, we need to have encryption laid over it so that that data can only be read by the source and the destination. We can help you identify solutions that can do this should you need something for your sensitive data. Consider a personal VPN for secure browsing remotely. So a personal VPN essentially routes traffic through an encrypted channel. So you say you're going to go to Google, well, that's really going through an encryption layer before you're going to Google. So then everything is encrypted. I would just say, I believe I shared something about this on LinkedIn, on social media through us and DP Solutions. A lot of the personal VPN applications you got to be careful with because they are often owned by the same companies. Some of those companies have questionable motivations. I'm just going to say I don't want to get too much in the geopolitical, but you know, a Chinese company that owns a bunch of different personal VPNs has some potential issues that we need to keep in mind on. And if you need help finding a decent VPN product, we can help you. Do you trust the local network you are communicating on, the hotel Wi-Fi, the airport, etc.? So once you get on a Wi-Fi that you don't control, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. You don't know who else is on that wireless access point. You don't know if that's a device that, their wireless access point that is a vendor-supported device that's getting patching and updates for its own flaws. You don't know if they're, even if it's a supportable device, if the IT people managing that device are doing the firmware updates necessary to keep that thing in check. So if you really don't know what's happening on that network, then the ideas that I'm saying about personal VPN, encryption and transit, etc., become even more important, because we don't want anybody, even people on that local network within that hotel Wi-Fi or the airport, to be able to see that data. You might even consider, and I'm going to skip to my next point here, you might want to limit what devices can even connect to those networks, create rules on that stuff, because if you don't know what's going on in that network, chances are it's the Wild West, and people can read your information. So we really want to avoid that stuff. That kind of pivots to the next slide a little bit. So if you are working on a network you don't maintain, we wanted to give some tips to mitigate risks. I realize that I'm reluctant to say never do this stuff, because the reality is that we have expectations to do these things. So let's create some rules, let's create some parameters, let's create some tips so that we're trying to do this in the least risky way possible. Limit what you do on those networks. I can't imagine why we would need to transmit a batch of social security numbers or a sensitive piece of information while we're sitting in the airport waiting for our flight. There's got to be a time that we can set aside, either back in our office in a trusted environment, or at the very least in a private network, etc., where we can do this stuff. Even consider the idea of personal hotspots. At least a personal hotspot, either your cell phone or a little USB dongle that connects to a cellular connection or something like that. Even those things can mitigate the risk of working in a public environment. Don't automatically connect to any open Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc. So I say etc. because a cell phone, for example, has things like near-field communication for local payments and through credit cards and stuff like that. All of these radio signals all could be exploited for bad stuff. And I would imagine there are probably vulnerabilities on these protocols that we don't even know about yet that could be exploited right now. So we really don't want to automatically connect to really anything except trusted networks. Every device that has wireless technology has the ability to disable automatic connection to these open networks, and we really should make sure we don't do that. Disable device visibility and other auto sharing features. So when you connect to a Wi-Fi access point, and I bet a lot of people are familiar with this, it'll often ask you, well, what kind of environment is it? Is it a work network, a public network, etc.? We don't want somebody else even seeing that our device exists on this network. There's really no reason on a public network why someone else should be able to see that your device is there and potentially connect to it, even if they're rejected. We don't want someone even having visibility on that stuff. So any auto sharing features, I just don't see the point in having them in public networks. And if you don't know how to set this up, we can talk with you about it. I mean, we set up a lot for our managed clients. We set up a lot of rules for these things, so it's probably not a concern. But if you're not sure if your devices are set to do this, I think some additional configuration is worthwhile. As I mentioned before, consider if possible just working on the data elsewhere. If it's really sensitive, you might just have to say it's going to have to wait. Or you could ask someone maybe in your home office that has access to this data in a secure environment, hey, can you send Bill, this sensitive document, I'm not really in a good network right now. I'm not really sure what's going on. I really don't want to take a risk. Can you do this? You're back home in Baltimore. Send this stuff off, and we'll do it securely. And that way we don't have to really stress out about it as much. I think that's a good idea. So consider everything you can do. It's really important that we just limit what we do, how we connect, and really minimize what we do on networks we don't maintain, because it's really, it is the Wild West. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Next, I want to talk about mobile device management. So, I mean, I think anyone who's attended these things has probably heard me talk about this before. Whether they're personally or company owned, we really have to have mobile device management. It increases device supportability, security, and corporate functionality. It looks like we have I had a typo. We had decided instead of device. I apologize. I'll fix that before we share this. Whether they're personally coming out, we have to have something that supports this stuff. I think there's a big rush as iPhones and Android phones and all these other smartphones and tablets came on the market. Oh, it's great. We can just connect them. I can do all this work remotely, and I can just tap here and there and do all my work, and that's terrific. But we forgot about actually putting security on them and enforcing rules and stuff. But when you do implement mobile device management, you can do a lot of really great things to minimize risk, whether it's a personal device or a company device. So you can force passwords, and also have remote wipes after a certain amount of failures. You would be surprised. It's funny, when I talk about this sometimes, I think I talked to somebody about this the other day, and they say, well, people should be doing this anyway. And I go, yes, they should be doing this stuff anyway, but we're talking about it because people don't do this stuff normally. If a device has sensitive data on it, there's really no reason that when it is locked that it shouldn't have a password to open it or a fingerprint thing or something like that. And then I think it's also worthwhile to say, look, if you fail that password 10 times, the device is going to go to factory default. If somebody picks up your device somewhere and they have a password and they're trying to crack it, it should wipe. Otherwise, they could just keep guessing forever. I mean, a lot of these passwords are 4-digit passwords. I suppose if you have enough time and ingenuity, you can get into these phones. So we should force remote wipes after a certain amount of mobile device login failures. For encryption at rest, most phones will allow you to have the ability to encrypt the storage at rest with mobile device management. So that if, for example, you can't get into the password, you can't just hook up a USB cable to the device and start reading data off of it. Use it like a USB drive or something like that. So we can force encryption of storage at rest and make sure that the volumes on this data are not readable without access to the authentication procedures. So we can force that using mobile device management, really important. Force remote wipes of specific data should the staff member leave. So somebody moves on, for better or worse, either they get fired or they quit or something. They don't need access to your email anymore. We should be able to go to that device and wipe that email off. And people should be okay doing that on personal devices. Mind you, we're not wiping everything. We're just saying, hey, your company email is not your property, and when you leave the company voluntarily or involuntarily, we're going to force a remote wipe of that data should the staff member leave. So that's something we can do with MDM, and I think it's really important. Similarly, just like with the patch management stuff I mentioned before on desktops and laptops, we can control application installation of patches. We can say, hey, you have to have this application installed. You have to have your multi-factor authenticator installed. You must have your patches done. You must have your OS patches done. It forces these things rather than makes it an option for the user so that they can, say, oh, not now, wait a day, whatever. We want to force this stuff. We want to have some control on these devices. Again, if you're using a personal device to do company work, I think you have to volunteer some of the rights on those devices away, certainly for things like application installs and patches. I don't think it's reasonable to say that you want to control that yourself. Otherwise, they shouldn't be using that device, and we can say, no, you're not allowed to use a personal device to do this stuff. Whoops, why did that happen? I just lost, there we go. For some reason, my presentation ended. Okay, and it just did it again. We also need to do things like limit communication like NFC or Bluetooth. So we can the things I talked about before, limiting open connections to Wi-Fi or NFC or Bluetooth, we can do those sorts of things with mobile device management. Physical device security. This is often overlooked. We have a little graphic here that the computer equals a wallet. And the reason I say that is when we look at this wallet over here, it's probably, what, a $20 wallet or something like that, just a leather wallet. And if we lost the wallet itself, who cares, right? We'll go to wherever and buy a new wallet. What we care about are these $100 bills in it and all the cash and all the credit cards. It's the contents of the wallet that we care about, not the wallet itself. Well, same for the piece of your laptop. If you left your phone in a taxi cab and you lost it, you'd be out a lot of money. You know, some of these phones get pretty expensive these days, $700-800 for a phone to replace it without all the subsidies that the mobile carriers give you. You'd be out a lot of money, but even worse, you'd be out the data on the phone. And in some cases, you might be subject to fines, other liabilities. You might have to recreate the data. That's much more expensive than the device itself. These devices are very replaceable. It's the data on it that's not replaceable and what we want to protect. So with that in mind, let's talk about physical device security. First off, there is zero reason to check a laptop or a cell phone at the airport. We've all been there when you go to the Southwest counter or whatever, and you give your luggage to the attendant. It goes on that little carousel, and it disappears in the dark, and you don't see it again for another 6 hours when you get back to your destination, and it comes off of the carousel at the destination. And by the way, what if that doesn't happen? What if the luggage is lost? Or what if the luggage didn't make it to the connecting flight or something? That happened to me quite recently. It's important we know where these devices are. We don't know who's opening it up. We don't know who's looking at the stuff. You really should not check them. You should have visibility on these devices really at all times. Consider what happens if you leave your device in a hotel room. So lock it up or hold it, or use a device lock. So there are safes in the hotels that you can use with combinations. If you have devices that are super sensitive, people can get into your hotel room, maintenance people, whatever. We really don't want to leave those devices there if we're concerned about the data on them. So lock it up. You might even, if it's really, really sensitive, hold it. I was traveling recently, and there was a gentleman on the flight, and he worked in some kind of engineering and was doing some sensitive design. His laptop was so sensitive that he was unwilling to even put it in the overhead bin. We didn't get into it, but he was working on something as a government contractor that was of a very sensitive nature, and literally the thing was glued to him. And I could see that being plausible if the device is that sensitive. We don't want somebody accidentally picking it up and taking it away. Encrypt drives at rest. So if you have sensitive data sitting on the device, if that device travels a lot, it's really a good idea to use something like a BitLocker or something like that to encrypt the drive at rest, so that if the device is stolen, they can't just remove the hard drive from the device, hook it up via a USB converter, and read the data. If that device is encrypted at rest, the data doesn't mean anything to the person who takes that device. So really important that we do that. And if you don't have a drive at rest, an encryption at rest solution, we can help find one for you. Remote wipe. This should be something enabled, and this should be something that you're not afraid to use should the device be lost. If it's gone, you have sensitive data on it, it is very reassuring to say, well, the second we saw that device was lost, we wiped the data. It really limits the possibility of a data breach. And then I always say consider other tools like privacy screens, webcam covers, etc. What if somebody on a public network hacks your webcam, is looking at you or what you're doing? What if somebody's looking over your shoulder and reading the data on your thing? There are privacy screens we can use. And then, of course, there's always just I'm going to position myself in such a way where this stuff can't be looked at, or, as I mentioned earlier, not even working on something remotely if you're worried about eavesdropping. Eavesdropping is a real thing. Social engineering, people look out for this stuff and try and take this information. Excuse me. Enable Find My Phone. Some devices have the ability to use GPS to see where the phone is. You leave a phone in a taxi cab, you might be able to see where that phone is. in real time. That's a great feature and something I highly recommend. The other side of security, always, there is no technology out there that will protect everything. So we need to have a good culture and people who need to understand the importance of security and the risks they face when they're working. The expectation for a lot of people is that they'll buy a bunch of stuff and everything will be secure. And my answer to them always is, you're only as secure as the person using the device. Unfortunately, people are the weakest link here. And if somebody voluntarily gives up information because they've been fooled, or voluntarily clicks on something because they've been fooled, it doesn't really matter what security we put in behind the scenes. So the first thing is, especially when we're working remotely, we need to establish some basic rules for that remote work and have staff sign off on those rules. It's not enough just to issue a list of things, this document that we've created about acceptable use, and then expect everybody to read it. We want people to actually have to sign off and say, yes, I understand. Yes, I know the consequences to me, so that they can't claim ignorance later on. The sign off is really important because it basically says, we are expecting you to do this. It sends an important message. Excuse me. Make sure that staff knows about proper storage, sharing, and handling of sensitive data. So they need to know if they have a sensitive document that they misfile, or if they send out an email in an unencrypted fashion that has sensitive data on it, that they are creating a violation and that they're putting the company at risk and their clients. We should really care about that stuff. And they need to know exactly what they should do with sensitive data and how. Where does it go? How does it get shared? Who does it get shared with? How is it handled in the end? They need to understand what it is, and they should have an overview of what the tools are we use. They don't have to know everything about all the technical ins and outs of what we're doing, but they should understand the purpose of these things so they don't take it casually. They should understand that, yes, maybe you have to do an extra step to send an email in an encrypted fashion, but there's a reason for this, and that they should understand that reason so they're buying into it, and they're not just not doing it because, well, it's just a pain in the butt. They should understand the importance that they buy into it and culturally engage with it. You can make other rules about what kind of work we expect to be done remotely. This is okay, that is not okay. I think we've talked about that a little bit, so I'm not going to belabor the point. One that's extremely important is to encourage communication, especially as it comes to things like suspicious events, incident response, and disasters. People need to know how to communicate with management, who in management they talk to, how to communicate maybe with their clients or third parties that they deal with, that something is potentially be done. Hey, my laptop was stolen. If you get any weird emails from me, just be cautious. This happened. You should know about it. How to communicate with IT resources when you're on the road. Hey, I'm in Provo, Utah, and I lost my laptop. What do I do? They should be able to have a channel to reach out to IT support no matter where they are, so that the IT support can begin taking actions, and we don't have to wait for somebody to figure out where they're going with it. Time is money in this situation, and we really need to have a timely response. They should understand exactly what the incident response and disaster recovery protocols are. There is a reactive element you might want to implement depending on compliance risks and et cetera. I mean, these can be a little bit more expensive, but they're extremely important for quick response. So let's say we've done everything we can, but then something happens anyway. As I said, there is nothing that's 100% secure. What can we do to stop an attack? And I think you have to consider this, especially if you have a mobile workforce where the attack vectors are all over the place. The first is logging. So there are tools that will allow us to log transactions that occur on every device, when someone logged in, when they opened a file, when they saved the file, how they shared the file, so on and so forth. So we know exactly what happened with that user, when it happened, et cetera. So we can come up with a forensic analysis of what happened with the incident, where it went, et cetera, so that we can figure out what happened later. Excuse me. The second is monitoring and what we would call a security operations center. So logging is like having cameras that record everything. all the things that are happening. And monitoring and security operations is like having the security guard watching this stuff all the time and looking for suspicious things and going out and saying, hey, what's that weird thing I saw on camera too? I'm going to go check that out. You know, logging is great. Having monitoring with it is even better. And as you might imagine, it costs a little bit. There's some resource investment into having this sort of solution. But if you're subject to NIST compliance or other compliance standards, they often demand these things. But B, we can actually mitigate the actual event, the security incident itself, if we're able to respond to it quickly because we have people in place looking to identify it, as opposed to the time where the end user realizes it. Hey, you know what? My computer's starting to do weird stuff. The attack may have already occurred. You may already be an hour or two into the attack, and we're already facing much more significant consequences than perhaps the SOC saying, hey, I identified this at 5 minutes and we're already responding. This could be a major, major difference in the outcome of a data breach. So consider this sort of thing. And then stuff like forced disconnections. Hey, it sort of goes along with the password stuff where it does the forced wipe on a mobile device. Are there things that we can do that say, you know what, you've attempted to log in so many times, now you're blocked from this IP from logging in, or your account's been locked, or whatever? If there's anything that we can do to lock down the system in the event that something weird is happening, and now an admin has to go in and do some more work to be able to resume operations, it's better to have false positives where we shut everything down and stop the attack from occurring than to allow too many connections, not stop something we could have stopped using automated tools, firewalls or fail safes, I should say, that allow these things to occur indefinitely. So now I'm going to pivot to Q&A. I mean, this is a very broad topic, like a lot of the topics we get into today. So I really encourage those in the audience to ask questions, and maybe I can provide some insight. And as always, we're looking for your feedback for other things we can talk about in the future. So any questions are welcome.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. As Ben said, if you have any questions, feel free to use the question box on your screen to type them out. We'll go ahead and do our best to answer them. Okay, looks like we have one question came in, Ben. What is the best way to physically secure my device?
Yeah, so we went into this a little bit. So when you leave and you're actually planning on your trip, think about what devices you're going to have. So I'm going to have my cell phone, I'm going to have my laptop, and I'm going to have my tablet. And then you have to say, well, what am I doing on each of these devices? Well, on the cell phone, all I'm doing is checking my work email. On the laptop, I'm accessing the CRM, doing my work email, using Microsoft Teams, whatever, the 10 things that I'm going to do on this thing. The laptop is a big work powerhouse for this example. And then on my tablet, I'm not doing anything. All I'm going to do is read some Kindle books on it, and it has nothing to do with work. Well, if you ask me, we have to then lock down physically the laptop and say, okay, when are we going to be away from this device? Well, you know what? On Tuesday, I'm going to the outing on the town, and so the device is going to sit around in my hotel room. So you might consider locking it up in that safe if you have room, or putting it back in your luggage and locking your luggage somewhere, doing those sorts of things. You might consider using, I think Kensington makes them, those physical locks where you literally bolt it down, like you might bolt down a bicycle to a piece of furniture so it can't be taken. Now, I'm not saying people in hotels are going to be taking this stuff, but we can't take it for granted. And so I think it's really important to consider those physical locks. It's important that we just know where this stuff is at any time. Lastly, and again, I can't stress it enough, any device, no matter where it goes, that has sensitive data stored with it at rest should have encryption on the device itself, so that if the device walks off, that someone can't just connect to that device and start reading information on it. There are a lot of great products. They're usually not that expensive that can lock those things down, and you really mitigate the data breach that could happen should a device be lost or stolen. But it all starts planning ahead and knowing what you're going to do before you leave.
Okay, excellent. Hopefully that answered the question. All right, we did have one more come in. How can I safely share documents with my colleagues while I'm on the road? I guess collaboration.
Yeah, so this is a big question. It's a big question, and there's going to be a lot of variation depending on the way you work. So I can talk about how you approach this sort of thing. So first, think about your recipient, right? What do you need to share with them, and what do they have to, what do they have to see? Maybe they do a lot of email. Okay, well, if they're doing a lot of email, we need to have email encryption ready so that we can share it that way. First, so the process is really, let's first identify the workflow that we need to meet and the tools that we're using. So this device, and this is our workflow and how we work. And then we say, okay, how do we secure that workflow? Again, the primary question is that, what are we trying to do? What's our recipient, and where are we going to be? And then matching a security to those solutions. And the specific answer is really going to vary based on the person.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And we do have one last question that came in. Let's see. Is the Wi-Fi on airplanes themselves safe to use?
No, not in the broad sense. It's certainly not as safe as something you maintain. So consider the following. The only requirement to connect to an airplane's Wi-Fi is paying them, basically, whatever their $10 fee or something to connect to the Wi-Fi. Something tells me that wireless access points, and I don't have an authority on this, I've not done tests on them, but something tells me that the Wi-Fi devices in these planes are not the best. I cannot imagine that it's easy to put this stuff in and replace it. And I would imagine on the carrier's set of priorities, their focus on the plane is a lot of things other than securing Wi-Fi. They're probably more worried about making a safe flight than they are about the security of their Wi-Fi. Additionally, all the other concerns remain. It's basically like Starbucks. You don't know who's on that network, what they're doing, what kind of stuff they're doing, etc. Obviously, when the data leaves the airplane and beams down, it's probably beaming to a satellite and then back down to the Earth, the data is not encrypted in any of that stuff. So you should consider things like personal VPN, etc. I'm really pretty uncomfortable with doing significant communications on a flight. It's kind of scary to me. I feel like in a lot of ways it's even more vulnerable than, say, a Starbucks. I just think it's wrought with peril. And part of that's instinct, gut. I wish I had hard data on that, but I just think that you complicate the matters that are already complicated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Does anyone have any more questions? Please type them in. Otherwise, I think that was our last question.
All right, great. Well, I'll just say before we disconnect, in case anybody wants to toss one at the last second. Thanks everybody for joining us. My contact information is here. I encourage all of you to make sure you get our security tips. And also check out our other content. If you want to hook up with us on LinkedIn, DP Solutions, or me personally, you can check us out. We're always posting new information. Yesterday, I was posting something about the Capital One breach. We want to always educate, always share information, always give takeaways. And, you guys, it really is important that everybody is properly prepared to make the right management, the right planning, and have the right education so that you can have the best technology success. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. And again, a recording of the webinar will go out later today. Thank you, everybody.